What's good, Nightmare fam? Who else out there always breathed a huge sigh of relief after graduating high school and thinking they'd never have to set foot in that teenage cesspool ever again? Yeah, me too. But then, somewhere down the line, that dreaded high school reunion invitation would always inevitably show up in the mail. And whether you actually enjoyed your glory days or just wanted to humble brag about your life, something always made a bunch of us bite the bullet and go back to that all-too-familiar campus hole for one last nostalgic romp. For me, stepping onto that very same parking lot and walking through those doors never failed to trigger some very specific memories, both good and horrifyingly bad. It was always a weird, almost uneasy wave of emotions all hitting me at once. Flashbacks of old friends, petty high school drama, awkward pubescent encounters. High school sure does hang around with you for a while, doesn't it? Well, as the 3 true tales I've gathered for this video will attest, sometimes that uneasy, haunted feeling you get returning to your old alma mater runs much deeper than just a few unpleasant memories. Sometimes, high schools actually do harbor some seriously dark, disturbing, and even life-threatening paranormal forces at work. So let's ditch the plastic name tags and dive into 3 of the most bone-chilling, truly scary as hell horror stories to ever unfold at high school reunions across the nation. These are the type of reunion experiences that will quite literally scar your soul for life. Let's get it. Story number 1. The cast party killings. This first story comes from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and it involves a grisly incident that took place at a high school's theater department reunion back in 2018. The story was shared by Kim, who was a senior member of the drama club back in the day. Like most high school reunions, this theater reunion started out as a pretty casual, feel-good event. Alumni from all the way back to the 70s came together to reconnect, share some drinks, tell old stories from performing in school plays together, and all those late nights spent backstage. And just like back in their theater kid days, things kicked off with a little cast party in the old high school auditorium after hours, featuring some underage drinking, dope smoking, and probably a bit more debauchery than you'd want at a normal school function. According to Kim, that's when things started taking a seriously twisted, terrifying turn courtesy of a hideously scarred man that nobody could seem to identify or remember being part of their drama troupe. This ominous, groaning individual first appeared in shadowy wings of the stage, frightening several people with his disfigured appearance. When approached, the disturbing man claimed to be a student from a few years ahead of Kim's class, someone who was horribly burned in a freak accident involving stage lights and pyrotechnics during his senior production. He said the injuries never healed properly, leaving him reclusive and disfigured for life. At first, people just sort of gawked at him morbidly, but as the disfigured man grew increasingly aggressive and volatile in his ranting, constantly talking about getting revenge for some perceived wrong, a few alumni actually started getting physically afraid and called the police. That's when all hell broke loose. This maniac suddenly produced a switchblade and started wildly slashing at anyone who tried getting near the stage. When the rest of the crowd rushed the exits in terror, the doors were locked from the outside, trapping everyone inside with this deranged former student. Complete chaos ensued. People were dragged into the shadowy wings, never to be seen again. Others were slashed, gutted, dismembered by the blade-wielding monster, filling the auditorium with anguished screams. According to Kim, he didn't stop his rampage until the police breached the doors nearly an hour later, only to find over a dozen mutilated victims sprawled across the stage and seats, abandoned in a gruesome scene straight out of a horror film. That disfigured man was never clearly identified, and he seemingly escaped into the night, whereabouts still unknown to this day. But any excitement the surviving alumni had for their school's drama program was permanently extinguished that fateful evening. A grisly example of how past traumas can sometimes return to haunt us in very real, very deadly ways. Story number 2. The vice principal's revenge. Our next nightmare comes from Atlanta, Georgia, where a high school's 20-year reunion took a shockingly sinister turn back in 2014. This account was shared by Cynthia, who attended the ill-fated event. By all accounts, Cynthia's 20-year high school reunion started off perfectly normal and pleasant enough. Former classmates gathered in their old high school's gymnasium to reconnect, show off pictures of their kids and careers, and reminisce about the good old days over some beers and snacks. However, The cheerful atmosphere took an extreme turn when the school's former vice principal, Mr. Daniels, arrived fashionably late to the party. This caused a bit of a stir, as most alumni still vividly remembered the cantankerous, ill-tempered administrator who took great joy in meticulously disciplining and belittling students over even the most minor infractions. As Daniels made his grand entrance, audible groans could be heard rippling through the crowd. Nevertheless, a few alumni still went over to greet their former tormentor, extending an olive branch in the spirit of reuniting and letting bygones be bygones. That's when things got seriously ugly. Without any provocation, Daniels began aggressively shoving former students and hurling a torrent of verbal abuse, calling them all disrespectful punks and miscreant scum, just like in the old days. When one guy tried calming him down, Daniels headbutted him square in the face, prompting a few other alumni to restrain. The deranged ex-vice principal. What happened next has been burned into Cynthia's brain forever. She remembers watching in total shock and horror as Daniels suddenly produced a long, serrated hunting knife and started wildly slashing at anyone who got within arm's length. At first, people thought he was just putting on an intimidation act. That is, until the first gurgling screams rang out after he caught one guy across the neck, nearly decapitating him. That's when the entire gym erupted into mass pandemonium, with people frantically scrambling for the exits as Mr. Daniels calmly walked through the chaos, butchering any former students unlucky enough to still be in reach of his blade. By the time police managed to subdue and apprehend the maniac, Daniels had killed 6 alumni and wounded over a dozen more. As he was dragged away, still shouting profanities and deranged tirades about teaching respect, Daniels left behind a gruesome scene that instantly transformed what should have been a nostalgic class reunion into an authentic, living nightmare. In the aftermath, it was theorized Daniels must have finally snapped and developed a deep, homicidal resentment toward his former students for perceived lack of discipline and constant disrespect back in the day. Needless to say, he took the concept of tough love and discipline way too far that night. Story number 3, the class of 28 returns for our final reunion horror story. We're heading all the way back to the late 2000s in a small rural town in eastern Missouri. And I'm warning you now, this one gets pretty damn disturbing and otherworldly. It comes from Brandon, who attended his local high school's 100th anniversary alumni celebration in 2007. According to Brandon, the big reunion bash was meant to be a momentous occasion, with former students going all the way back to the classes of the 1920s theoretically able to attend. Since Brandon's high school first opened its doors way back in 1907, a special spotlight was supposed to be shined on the very first graduating class from 1928 during the centennial ceremony. So you can imagine the confusion and murmurs in the crowd when a very unusual group of elderly guests arrived, claiming to be the original class of 28. From the wizened, almost skeletal appearances of these ancient figures, some needed to use canes or walkers, nobody could quite believe these individuals were actually still alive and kicking after 100 years. Nevertheless, the group of nearly a dozen feeble senior citizens insisted they were the celebrated original alumni and demanded to be given their time to address the audience. When they took to the podium, that's when things quickly went from puzzling to absolutely terrifying. Brandon recounts how the frail, hunched-over members of the class of 28 slowly raised their bony arms and began chanting in some guttural, unknown language. As the deranged murmurings grew louder and more fevered, Brandon watched in abject horror as their aged, decrepit bodies gradually began transforming before his very eyes. Flesh, tendons, and musculature seemed to stretch taut against their fragile skeletons as their height increased by several feet. Their faces distorted into ones of unholy, demonic visages, elongated jaws unhinged to reveal rows of dagger-like fangs. What remained of their human-looking skin began hardening and cracking, almost appearing like dried-up leather or decaying tree bark. By the time the disturbing metamorphosis reached its full potential, the creatures let out a deafening, bone-chilling screech in unison that Brandon describes as the most ungodly, evil sound he's ever heard in his life. That's when the monsters started violently attacking the innocent crowd, ripping apart and messily disemboweling anyone they could get their razor-sharp claws on. As the gym dissolved into total chaos, Brandon managed to escape in the pandemonium and rushed to alert authorities. But by the time police arrived, every last member of that unholy, shape-shifting class of 28 had vanished without a trace, along with over 24 mutilated victims. To this day, there has been no logical explanation, supernatural or otherwise, for the sadistic, seemingly ritualistic massacre that played out amidst what was supposed to be a celebratory school reunion. Brandon maintains those demons, or whatever sort of skin-walking entities they were, must have been patiently waiting dormant for an entire century to finally unleash their blood-soaked reign of terror at that centennial event. Just think about that the next time you pass on attending your stupid school's reunion. You may just be saving your own life. There you have it, 3 of the most insane, terrifying true tales of high school reunions literally becoming scenes out of apocalyptic horror movies. Let me know in the comments if you guys want to hear even more paranormal horror stories like these, or if you have any reunion experiences of your own to share. Hopefully not ones involving bloodshed and massacres. Be sure to hit that like button if you made it through all the nightmare fuel, and I'll catch you creeps on the next one.